The ancient jungles of South America hold many secrets of past civilizations, of nations that would topple the world's armies should they be released. In these next 100 days, we will live and grow an empire among these nations, declaring war and making peace with the empires that rule this land. We will seek to establish a giant empire, take down the ancient temple of the Aztec, and take down the ancient capital of the Aztec nation. This is surviving 100 days in the age of the Maya and Aztec. Let's begin. If this video gets 20,000 likes, then we'll do a part 2. Enjoy the next 100 days. Day 1 of surviving 100 days in hardcore Minecraft in the South American jungles of the ancient era. As I gazed upon the beauty of this landscape, barely touched by human hands, knowing full well the cataclysmic events that would soon take place, I thought to myself, ooh, a temple. I quickly rushed over to see what loot was inside. As I walked up to what could only be the chieftain of the temple, he offered me trades for different coins. I wasn't sure yet how to get these coins, but I knew this would be valuable for the future. I noticed that none of the temple men were attacking me, so for the time being, we must have been allies. I then ventured deeper and deeper inside of the temple to see what it held. I found this catechism or some sort of tomb room, where, I could only imagine, ancient bodies were stored. But when I tried to open them, it wouldn't let me, as conquering this old temple was the only way to unlock the treasure inside. I knew I had absolutely zero chance of taking on these men, so I decided just to venture deeper and see what was inside. As I looked through the rest of the temple to see what was inside, I could only think to myself, this was just a tiny tidbit of what this world had to offer. The most expansive kingdoms yet to explore. This was going to be a crazy 100 days. If I survived till the end. I then began wandering around the jungle aimlessly, looking for anything lifelike or anywhere to gather supplies. I noticed some giant structures in the distance that seemed to have been aged with time. I was then attacked by these little creatures and immediately ran away for my life. I then began venturing through the jungle at night, which I would not advise to any human being ever, especially in this era. I began looking for anywhere I could find some shelter, and then I found an old abandoned structure and went inside. It had some basic supplies inside, but as I waited longer, I heard growling outside, and then a giant roar. I wasn't gonna move. I was staying in this hut all night. Upon morning, I ran outside of the house as fast as I could so whatever was growling at me could not catch me. I then began venturing for some food, as I knew I would need supplies if I wanted to traverse through the jungle and find a place to call my home. I then began venturing deeper and deeper into the jungle, exploring the terrain and seeing these animals I had never seen before. It looked entirely creepy and I had wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. I wanted to find a good place to live, away from some of the tribes so I wouldn't get killed in the first few days. I then was attacked by a tribe and I immediately ran away. I then found a small tribe in the jungle that didn't hate me so much, but seemed like they were off to war. So, for now, I'd sneak in, gather some supplies, and then let them be. Thankfully, they were a peaceful tribe to me, but it seems like they were fighting somebody off. But I didn't have time to stick around and find out who, and after gathering my food, I was on my way. When I left the safety of the small village, I was immediately attacked by a giant who had soldiers at his command. I ran away as quick as possible. Surviving inside of this jungle was going to be a tremendous effort, but I knew if I could raise an army and build up strong defenses, I could stand a chance. I found another small abandoned village and I decided to camp there for the night. It also looked like a very nice space, so I think for now we would call this home. As the morning came, I began building my kingdom. I wanted to have an entirely different approach this time. I wanted guard towers in the trees, I wanted a civilization built in the middle of the jungle without impacting the terrain too much, with pathways going from each tree, custom-made trees with different types of barracks and defense posts inside. It was going to be insane. But with every large undertaking comes humble beginnings. So I began by placing a town center to begin attracting some settlers into my new settlement from the surrounding area. And from there, I began editing the terrain and making it a little bit easier to build. I then left the protection of my settlement to go and find some mines. I knew this underground terrain barely touched by humans was going to be full of treasure, but also full of mobs and hostility that I had never faced before. But I knew I had no other choice.
so I began looking for an entrance to the giant catacombs underneath the Earth's surface. Whilst in the mines, I found ancient pottery and small ruins of civilizations that used to live beneath the Earth's surface. Before humans emerged onto the landscape, this must have been their first home, and I could only wonder what treasures lurked inside of these caves. I also found some ancient Aztec ore, which, when combined with other elements, would create things that I had never seen before. But for the time being, I would just mine it and save it for later. As I began smelting down some of my ores, I noticed a large pool of water and I decided to go and investigate. Near the bottom was a treasure chest that was sunk beneath the water. And, after some time, I was able to break the chest and gather the loot inside. Whilst in the mines, I saw a dungeon-like structure, and 2 skeletons began attacking me. They brought me down to half a heart before I was able to kill him. That was the closest I've been in a while to dying in hardcore Minecraft. From there, I noticed the structure had some sort of chests inside, but it was heavily guarded by mobs. I attempted to penetrate it, but I was repelled very quickly by the amount of skeletons in there and zombies that were soon to be spawning. I thought the best idea was to go and grab a lava bucket and drop it right on their heads, so that's what I did. It worked like a charm, and I was able to eventually exploit the dungeons inside of the chests after having a few more close calls. Inside of the chests, I found a lot of tomes, which, when combined with a max enchanted book, can increase the enchantment level by 1. I also found some Aztecian Runes. I wasn't sure still what these were used for, but I collected them for the time being. I returned home the next day, put all my mining supplies away, and then ventured into the jungle. I wanted to start collecting food so I could start putting up guards before I started expanding my city. I knew some of the neighboring tribes would see me building and would come to attack me, so I would need a decent amount of an army to protect my lands. Inside of this game, the tribes actually build themselves, and over time, when they see that you're weak, they wage war on you. So I knew I had to be ready for when that came, or strike first. So I went out into the jungle investigating for food, as to raise an army, I would need plenty of different kinds of foods. Whilst I was exploring, I found an old jungle temple and I decided to investigate what was inside. Although it was incredibly dark, I was able to navigate my way through to find the chests, and inside was a buried treasure map. This was definitely something I'd have to investigate, but for now I would just take the loot inside and continued my adventures. When I got home the next day, I began the creation of some more buildings now that my initial settlers had arrived. And from there, I began the creation of a small force that would protect my base. Rather than having troops patrol, I was going to have them put in different sections and then have a small group patrol from section to section. So I made my soldiers, and then I began outfitting them with some basic iron armor and some basic weaponry. I didn't have that many supplies at the moment, so I couldn't give them diamond gear, but I figured as much iron gear as I could give them, a shield, and a spear would do just fine. I then drew up orders to have them stationed at different points of the base, and then in this way they could guard from any oncoming attack. This wouldn't do very much against a large tribe, but at this point in the game I knew the tribes weren't too advanced, so it would be my best shot. Whilst exploring near my house the next day, I found a small Mayan village that was slowly building up. They didn't seem to hate me, so I decided to go and investigate what they had inside of their chests. But alas, they were locked, and unless I declared war inside of this small village, I would not be able to take any of the loot. And for now, I didn't want to declare war on anybody, as I wasn't really strong enough to do so, and with them so close, I figured it would be best to leave them as allies. Whilst poking around nearby, I noticed some other structures, and I decided to go and investigate. Some of them attacked me, but some of them were pretty neutral. I even walked right inside the small temple, and no one even attacked me. It was great. I didn't know if I wanted to make allies with this world or if I wanted to declare war and take the entire thing over, but for now, I would just deal with surviving, and I would think about that a little bit later. Whilst exploring, I saw a small structure in the distance, and they became hostile. This I figured I could take on because I had a few soldiers with me, and I really wanted to see what was inside of these little villages. So I began the attack, and after a while placed my soldiers down, and we began the slaughter. However, there was still men inside, and when I opened the front door, they came barreling out, and inside was a giant man. But thankfully he couldn't get out, and we were able to take out the soldiers, and then deal with him. I couldn't go inside because every time I got close to him, He absolutely decimated me, but I noticed I could be a certain distance away and I could still hit him, but he couldn't hit me. So I sat there for the next little while, striking him with my axe, until eventually he fell by my blade. I then went inside of the house, and I found a princess inside. She didn't seem hostile, so I decided to let her be. I attempted to trade with her, but it seems like she was not a trading type of person. And, with that being said, I looted the chests, and I went on my way. I assumed she'd find her home, or maybe that was her home, I had no idea, but it was her problem. When I got home, I noticed that my first structure was completed. It looked super cool. I climbed up to see what it looked like from the inside. When I was on the top, I noticed that different parts of it jetted out. I thought this would be perfect because if I could connect everything through bridges, this would be the perfect outlet for the bridges to start and then connect to all the other treetops. We could have an entire jungle kingdom and every single type of building connected through bridges. This was going to be super cool. I then went out exploring, and whilst exploring I found this small temple-like structure. I decided to spawn my guards in and we began taking out the surrounding guards. However, many archers lay atop and they were not coming down, so I quickly grabbed my men and then retreated, barely escaping with one heart. I decided I was going to try a different approach. Rather than trying to shoot them off, I was going to gather some wood and instead climb on top of the temple and attack them on their home ground. So I went and I collected some wood for some trees, and then I began bridging over. I was able to take them out and destroy all the guards. However, inside the temple I knew it was going to be a perilous fate, but I plunged right in anyway. As I journeyed inside of the temple, I found these creatures called spirit bloods. I had to slay them all as they attacked me as soon as I approached them. I then plunged deeper and deeper into the temple, running into more and more of these spirit-like objects. They were very, very strong, but we were able to take them out. And then, when they were all dead, we were able to loot the chests inside. There was some pretty decent loot, but I wanted more, so I would continue adventuring over the next little while. Whilst exploring, I found another one of these small little villages that was under attack. However, I didn't feel like I could be of much help, so I decided to leave and let them fend for themselves. I then found an exposed treasure chest out by a mine shaft. I then jumped down to grab it and mined all the loot. There didn't seem to be any more loot around, so I decided to move on and see what other adventures waited me. Whilst exploring the next day, I noticed in the distance a temple-like structure and next to it, some sort of mine area. And then when I looked beside me, I saw a crab and his arms were just going up and I couldn't. The crab meme came into my head of all the little guys. I then ventured to the temple-like structure. I knew I wasn't going to go too close to it because I knew there was going to be a ton of different mobs inside, but I would gather the loot on the outside and all the golden blocks. I then noticed a giant cavern below. I knew soon I'd have to venture back down into the mines, but for now, I was going to hold my peace. I ventured into a bit of the temple just to see who was around, and then I heard a roar, and I jumped out of my pants and completely ran away, like a PogChamp would. Nope, absolutely not. I continued adventuring, looting some abandoned structures, and then I arrived home. I wanted to replenish my army and begin a bit of base building and defense building. I knew growing an empire to take on some of these massive structures, I was going to need to have a huge base. I then began outfitting some more soldiers and giving them some gear. I then placed down some more buildings as my empire was needed to grow at a much faster rate. I had really been neglecting building and I really wanted to start focusing on it and building up my home. I spent the next while cleaning up a lot of the terrain around the base and collecting some supplies. I wanted to leave the jungle as jungle-ish as I could, but I also needed space to build the buildings. So I tried to have a nice balance of both. I knew soon it would be time to venture back into the jungles and begin facing down the powers that reside within. But I wanted to make sure my base was off to a good start before I ventured back into the depths. I then began work on a farm. If I was going to feed a giant army, I was going to need a lot of food, and also for myself because I'm a growing boy. So I began the construction of my own farm. And then I created some more soldiers, as soon I'd be venturing back out into the jungle, and I would need every man with arms I could get. But from there, it was time now to venture back in to the depths of the forest. out to begin my exploration, but before going too far, I decided to check in on the Mayan village just outside of mine. They seem to have been increasing in population, and their buildings and structures were expanding, but they were still peaceful for now, and they even wanted to trade, although at the time I had nothing to trade with, so I decided to venture on, but I had to keep that in mind that maybe I could trade with these people and build up a good relation with them. I then found a temple-like structure and I decided I wanted to invade it. So I took out the men on the outside first, but I soon began to realize that they was crawling with troops. And to be able to take this thing out was going to be a feat and nonetheless, but I would take it on. I slowly maneuvered my way closer and closer, taking out all the guards on the outside. And then, when I was inside, archers began berating down arrows on me. But me and my troops were able to stand our ground and take them out. However, eventually when I got down to the treasure room, I was the last man standing. All of my men had died. But I was still able to collect their armor, and in this way I could replenish my army later. I then ventured down into the loot rooms, and I began getting all the loot from the chests. This would help me fuel an even larger army, and help my economy when I began trading with other civilizations. The first thing I did when I got home was rebuild my army and set even more guards around the base and even more patrols. I knew as my empire grew in wealth, I'd become a bigger target for the empires near me, and I wanted to be as strong as possible. I'd set it so that there's different raids that come at different points during the game, and I've custom coded it so that during this game, empires will clash with us and find our city. But for the time being, I don't think we were big enough for that, so it was just time to guard against the small villages in the surrounding areas. I spent the next little while collecting resources and upgrading some of my buildings. I wanted to begin a transportation system between my village and the Mayan village close by. I wanted to suspend a bridge all the way from my city to theirs, and then in this way, when they were able to trade, I could develop an in-depth trading system so that I could have a bunch of supplies that I need and export supplies that I don't need to them. After creating a bunch of bridges, I began. It was quite a distance away in terms of actually building there, but I knew it would be well worth it. I used rail cart bridges. I can still walk on them and still traverse them back and forth, but what this will do for the future is allow me to build small little steam engines or mine carts on top, and then this way I can transport resources in mass back and forth. This is going to be crazy, because these Mayans collect resources like normal players do. But if there's an entire civilization collecting resources, they'll have so much for me to trade with. And then I can have my civilization collecting other resources. That's just essentially it's going to be a giant economy, and I'm going to get rich. The next day I decided to venture around some more. I found this prehistoric beast that tried to attack me, but I was able to put it down nicely. From there, I saw a giant temple. I knew I was no match for the temple yet, so I decided to instead go mining and see what dungeons lurk below the surface. I then found an opening and I decided to venture inside. I didn't exactly want resources per se, I was more interested in dungeons and lost civilizations that I might find underneath the Earth's surface. However, I would of course collect the rare ones as I came across them. Whilst mining, I noticed some blocks that didn't fit into the cave systems, and I decided to go investigate what was up there. When I got closer, I realized it was filled with zombies, and they dropped down to chase me. I quickly retreated, like a PogChamp would do, and I grabbed some hot stuff. I figured this would be the only way to repel them in an effective manner. I then began pushing my way forward inside of the catacombs, burning alive anything that would stand in my way. Eventually, I found a room that was full of tombs, but alas, it would not let me open them. Soon I would discover how to actually loot these things, but for now, I would leave it to the side. I did, however, find a full set of diamond armor, and decided to throw away my peasantry iron armor and equip this new source of power. I then ventured upstairs as I found some cobblestone stairs that led to an area I did not know what it was. And then I saw the ugliest creature I have ever seen. It was like a lizard, but also a man, and it was just atrocious and it scared me half to death. After defeating one, I realized there were many more, and I lured them downstairs and boiled them alive with my lava. Cooked lizard, how tasty. As I destroyed what was left of their army, I was attacked by their tribe's allies, the Zoltecs. This meant war. If their empire was going to wage war on me, this would also mean they were waging war on the Mayan civilizations, and we would not take that lightly. After destroying what was left of them, I lost a great deal of troops. However, the loot inside was absolutely amazing. I finally figured out how to actually loot the tombs properly. You don't right-click on them, you simply break them. They have a chance of spawning a hostile creature, but sometimes they just drop crazy loot. This would help furnish my future armies. Little did they know, this temple that tried to stop me would fuel the army that would be their downfall. I spent the next little while running back and forth from the temple, gathering the resources inside and transporting them back to my home. My backpack and inventory didn't hold close to enough of how much loot was inside. A few more small empires like these, and we could take on the mother cities that were held inside of this jungle. I started off the next bit by building bridges. I finally wanted to start linking all the structures I had in my small little town together by using jungle wood slabs. I thought this would look pretty cool, especially when we had giant structures everywhere and bridges going everywhere like a spider network. And then I began collecting some resources. I wanted to begin the construction of my house soon, but I was going to need some more stone to do so. I cleared out some of the terrain to allow my builders to upgrade some of the houses, and then I began the creation of my own home. I was going to use another jungle-themed house. I was going to provide a little bit thicker of a tree so it would stand out from the rest. I then began placing a platform down, and I bordered it by using some jungle wood, and then I used some cobblestone around that. I used some stone slabs on top of the cobblestone. This would give it a nice sort of triple accent, and I thought this aesthetic looked cool if you could have a little gap in the middle so you could see outside. This would also allow me to use a bow and arrow should I need to. I then used the glowstone to light up the house instead of using torches because torches are for peasants. I then began adding torches. I began adding torches to the side of my bridges to light them up a little and give them a little bit more of an accent. And then I began moving all of my items from the ground all the way to my house. It only took me 50 days to build a home. That's not bad, right? Then harvested my wheat farm like a pog champ, and using my new bridge, ventured into the Mayan city near my base. This city was getting bigger and bigger, and although we were allied, I was slightly concerned about what was going on. But nonetheless, I took on a quest from one of the villagers to find their lost friend. And after looking for some time, I discovered him and returned to the villager to let him know where he was. This would boost my experience with the villagers and increase my trade profits. From there, I began learning how the trade system works. Essentially, you walk into a house, and from there, someone will eventually come to greet you. Depending on the house that you're standing in, they'll give you different items. For instance, if you're standing inside of the blacksmith, they'll trade you different weapons. Whereas if you're standing inside of the farmer's hut, they'll trade you different crops. And after you've worked your way up in the experience levels enough, I discovered they'll teach you different ways to farm and new food materials. And if you somehow reach the top level of experience, they'll actually give the tribe to you. I liked this tribe. I then began a huge expansion of my city. First, I made a lumberjack stick. This would enable me to automatically collect wood and have one of my villagers tasked with always collecting wood. All I would have to do is supply them with an axe, and they would collect wood for infinite time. I then placed down another builder's hut, as if I wanted to expand the kingdom, I would need to have more builders. Builders are the only ones who can actually create structures, so only having one is a definite bottleneck in the system if you want to create a huge empire. I helped edit down the terrain for the new structures being erected, and then, after some farming, I began upgrading some of my new buildings. I then placed down my first barracks. This would enable me to train men rather than simply craft them. And, after a few days of work, I decided to walk around the bridges, and I marveled a bit at the kingdom that was being created. The next day I crafted some golden apples, gathered my supplies, and ventured out. It was now time to go and find one of the lost temples of the Inca. I found this giant pyramid-like structure, but it didn't seem to be inhabited by anybody. But when I climbed all the way to the top, I noticed a small 1x1 hole, and I jumped right in. However, upon jumping in, I was attacked by venomous spiders. This was not something I wanted to traverse. So, I quickly exited after defeating some of the spiders and continued venturing on. The next day, while exploring, I found another small tribe and they immediately attacked me. I ran away and I used the water to escape, but they were continuing to chase. So I placed an archer on the shore and then I worked as the bait. The archer was able to take everybody out while I got a few hits in myself. I then began working my way up the structure to find the main entrance. I was being shot by tribal archers while trying to cross the bridge to the gates, but eventually I was able to cross and I tore down the wooden gate and began to charge in to the remaining army. I began climbing up the last bit of the tower, taking out any guards as I went. When I got to the top, I began scavenging for supplies and taking everything I thought I might need. I grabbed the bookshelf so I could make an enchanting area a little bit later. Whilst adventuring, I found these creatures that sent shivers down my spine. I never wanted to mess with them. I made sure to navigate around them as they seemed to be protecting something. I found a ginormous temple that could only be the temple of the sun god. But outside it was guarded by a small tribe of Mayans. It seemed to be mostly uninhabited, but I had to take out the guards on the outside. And after doing so, I began pushing into the city itself. I wasn't sure where all the citizens were, but I'm sure I would find out soon enough. I then began pushing up the temple stairs, and at the top, I found the sun god. The battle began. The battle was fierce, but I knew I had to stand my ground as the rewards he guarded would enable me to push my civilization to the next stage. Eventually, after a hard-fought conflict, I defeated him. I looted the chest and found ancient weapons and a book titled The Lost City. I would read this later. For now, I had to leave. I just realized that the sun god was the god of the Aztecs, not the Mayans, and by slaying him, I had just declared war on the entire Aztec nation. Oopsies. I had to get home and begin preparing defenses against an attack. I returned home to find it raining in the rainforest. Would you look at that? I then slept so the rain would stop. I harvested some crops and began connecting the new bridges to my bridge system. The Empire had to be extremely mobile in case of an attack, and these bridges would be the best way to mobilize troops. I then worked on upgrading some of my buildings, and I built an enchanting area off of my home to begin getting better gear for myself. I began enchanting all of my items, and then began the creation of a bigger guard force. Now that my home was expanding, I needed more guards to protect the land. Although they wouldn't be able to hold off a full attack, the mobilization of my guards would enable me enough time to get down there and rebuttal an attack. I then tore down the structure near my home so I'd have more space to build. I built a mine atop the old structure. This would enable my villagers to passively gather mining resources. I then got an alert that a barbarian horde was on its way. I immediately mobilized and began heading southeast. I found a small force of men and began my attack. I placed down my own troops and we fought off the invaders before they got to the city. However, this was not good. I had now become a target for the surrounding tribes, and more attacks would surely come. I headed down into the mines to see what the other dungeons lay beneath and collect more iron for my army. I knew I would need a pretty big fighting force if I wanted to take on the Aztec capital before the 100 days completed. I began by creating more soldiers. Not only did my village need more protection, but soon I knew I'd be going against the greatest city South America had ever seen. I spent a while outfitting my newly made soldiers and giving them posts around the city. I then began another adventure to collect some more supplies and conquer the long-fabled Aztec temple I had seen at the start. While searching for the temple, I found another village inhabited by the lizard peoples. These half-men, half-creatures were vicious. I placed down my entire guard and we attacked. After a hard-fought battle, we killed the stragglers, and I looted the chests and the remaining baskets around the camp. Whilst traveling, I spotted more of what I knew as the Naga, and then I found the temple. I knew many riches were held inside and would be required for my new army. As I climbed the steps, I was attacked. This temple was under Aztec rule, and for now, they were hostile against me for what I had done. I guess killing their god probably wasn't the best move. However, whilst pushing through, I found a Spaniard. This made no sense, as why would Spain be here in South America in an Aztec temple? That question will have to be answered later, as I continued to push through, killing any resistance in my path. I then looted the temple and went on my way. As I continued adventuring, I made my way to the shoreline, and what I saw, I will never forget. An armada of ships as long as the eye could see. This was an invasion. Spain was coming. I had feared the Aztecs this entire time, but the true threat was on its way. I knew I had to get home as soon as I could. As I arrived home and began preparing up a force that would rival that of the ancient kingdoms of this earth. This world was mine. I stationed even more guards to protect my kingdom and cleared out more terrain for buildings. I then gathered the last bit of food I would need. Before heading out, I wanted to fortify my base even more. However, in the middle of it, I was attacked by a legion of barbarians. These weren't Aztecs, but Spaniards. They were teaming up against me. Vengeance would be bliss. I spent the next little while collecting more wood and creating some guard towers. I then mounted archers inside. This would allow for a hail of arrows on any intruder that dared come close. I connected the final buildings with a bridge and then headed out to solidify my fate and the fate of the continent. I found a massive temple guarded by the Naga. I attempted to fight them, but they ran away like cowards after an attack, so I pushed up the temple stairs. This evil would come crumbling down by my hands. I then pushed deeper into the heart of the temple. This was the final place I had to conquer before moving to the capital. I pushed deeper and deeper into the temple until finally I reached the base, where the treasure was guarded by an ancient serpent. I killed it and its surrounding horde of zombie-like creatures. I looted the structure and moved on to my final goal, the capital of the Aztec nation. I knew the Spanish Armada had taken most of the soldiers out of the capital, and this made it a prime time to attack. As I walked down the streets of the great capital, I began plotting its demise. I readied my soldiers and gave one last speech. And then we charged up the steps to meet our final foe. As the battle raged, I made my way into the main room atop the temple and fought the remaining chieftains. Such an act of war would cause the entire nation to fall upon my empire, but I'd be ready. As I stood atop the city that I had just conquered, I began to think, this evil that I was fighting against, whether God or man, I had killed more than any warlord of any era before me. Was I becoming the evil I sought to destroy?